Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining this fireside chat. Thank you. We'll just be starting shortly.
What's the camera?
So, our topic is bridging the gender divide through tech, data, and grassroots intentions. So, thank you all for joining. I'm sharing my screen. So, we'd like to just talk a little bit about women in tech. Who are we and why do we exist? Women in Tech is an international nonprofit organization on a mission to close the gender gap and to help women embrace technology with our head office in Paris. We are a global movement with the chapters in over 61 countries and counting over 250,000 members. What do we do? We focus on four primary areas that are a call for action: education, business, digital inclusion, and advocacy. We create impact through action to build skills and confidence, setting women up for success. That's what we need to do. We need to be successful and learn from our failures. It's a wonderful opportunity to be a volunteer on Women in Tech. So, how I'd like to start is I'd like to play a video, and I think it's relevant for today. And knowing that next month is National Women's Day in South Africa, so I'm going to share this video. I found it very interesting. It's Mercedes Benz on on their ad on what do they feel about women.
This is what it looks like to be exceptional, to stand out from the crowd, to make history. But what if women didn't have to be exceptional? What if they didn't have to be the first, the best, or the only woman? What if being a female engineer wasn't remarkable? What if women and men could compete as equals? I don't want to make history. I don't want to be the only woman. I want to be one of many.
And that's what I feel. We need to be one of many. We need to support each other. So, as we go into the real fireside chat with Jason. Right. So I want to just introduce Jason. So Jason is the founder of Capacitate Social Solutions, social entrepreneur, technology for impact practitioner. Over 20 years in the social economy, Jason works at the intersection of technology, data systems, monitoring, and evaluation, digital transformation, and social impact. Technology for impact. His focus is designing practical solutions that improve program visibility, accountability, and evidence based decision making across NGOs, funders, government, and development partners. He creates platforms that scale social change through initiatives including Yo Mobi, Youth Force, Girl Power, and other social impact platforms. Jason has supported youth development, community engagement, grant management, school nutrition, monitoring, household assessments, digital inclusion, and impact reporting. I hope I've done justice to you, Jason. You've you do amazing work supporting communities. So, it's so wonderful to have you on this platform with us supporting it. So, before we get to the heavy stuff, right? I was thinking, what's your first piece of tech that you ever owned or fell in love with? And did you have an idea back then it would lead you here?
Yeah, hi Prabashni, and evening everyone. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think kind of technology is something that only really came to me, I suppose, much later in life. And really, I was there when the kind of the first mobile phones came out, and I think that was a really pivotal point in looking at accessible technology and what a difference that accessibility makes in the lives of kind of everyone that has access to it. So I think certainly that first Nokia cell phone, the first Samsung flip phone. So I think those certainly were my most earliest engagements with technology, and probably one of most profound.
Okay. And did you think that would lead you here to be in tech and support women?
No, absolutely not. I think that's one of the myths that many children have when they are at school and finishing school, is that where you start out is where you'll end up. The journey is often long and meandering as you progress through life. So I think the end point, such as it is, because it's always changing, is often far from where you start out. So, but I think for me the journey has been cumulative. So I certainly use everything that I've done in the past in what I do today.
Very interesting. So, no, thank you for sharing that. And I know that, with AI today, we are exposed to so many AI tools like ChatGPT, chatbots, Google Gemini, now even Claude. And with that, I'm sure we've seen, like, there's some sort of a bias with these tools. What is your thoughts on that? When doing these prompts and things like that. Are you finding that?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I think that's very very evident across the board. I think it's changing as those models are assimilating more data. But certainly from a early development point of view, all of those models were trained on legacy data, and kind of bias and exclusion is deeply embedded with all of those legacy data sets. So absolutely, those legacy biases are imprinted within the system and reflect in the responses that we get when having a conversation with any of the large language models.
Yes. So that's why we go into designing for dignity is a striking phrase. What does that mean to you in practice, especially when building tech for under-resourced communities?
Well, I think in everything that we do, we follow very much a participatory approach, both in terms of system design, but also in the work that we do with monitoring and evaluation and research. So it's very much participatory focused and human centered when it comes to system design. We try to build with a high degree of contextual awareness. So in modeling out the user personas is a deeply immersive process. And we certainly bring in the research methodologies that we apply in monitoring and evaluation functions directly into that system building. So in terms of defining the requirements, and often it's non-functional considerations. We're looking at not necessarily the basics of how the system works, but the context in which it's going to be working. So I think it's designing for dignity is very much about contextual awareness, and that contextual awareness means understanding both the operating context, but also the kind of historical context of any given system user.
Very interesting. You spent over 20 years in the social
Not so
economy.
loud. Not so
Sorry?
loud. You can't say 20 years so loudly.
But you come with lots of expertise and experience and lots of learnings from this, which, I think it's great that we can draw from this. And where would from these learnings and this journey, right? What first drew you to the intersection between technology and social impact?
Well, firstly, thanks for not saying I come with lots of grey hair, but that really is a consequence of the journey through this intersection. I think really in a nutshell, what got me here is a combination of two things. Firstly, frustration, and secondly, resilience. So frustration, working in the social economy in particular, is fraught with frustrations and I think tension and anxiety because of the nature of the challenges that we face. But I think frustration because of the inefficiencies and the fragmentation and the lack of innovation. And I think that drives a lot of frustration across the board with both technologists, but also I think with development practitioners themselves. So certainly frustration has fueled a lot of the work that I've done over the past 20 years, certainly at the outset. I think there was a bit of naivety and optimism in thinking that we could change things early on and immediately achieve results. And I think that's where the resilience comes in, because kind of making those changes sure isn't a quick thing and sure isn't an easy thing. So I think what has kind of brought me to this point is that combination of kind of resilience and persistent frustration, because those challenges still exist. There have been improvements, but there's still a huge amount of work to do.
I do agree. And it's constantly changing. I mean, the platforms, the landscapes are constantly changing. And to get people to adapt to these changes is not the easiest, because we all at different levels of this change, this technology change. Yeah. So the UN Women just flagged that in their study that 133 AI systems, 44% showed gender bias, right? I know we spoke about the bias. Does that surprise you?
Oh no, not even a little bit. As I said, I think given what all those models were trained on, I'm quite frankly, I'm surprised it's not higher.
Right.
Because we've got, if you look at all of the collective data that's been consumed by those models in developing their capabilities and in building out a training base, it's the collective history of humanity, really, and that collective history has deeply embedded inequality that forms part of not just institutions, but forms part of our culture, forms part of our language. So I'm surprised it's not higher, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, because because who has availability to the internet and are using it, and is it giving good representation, as we're saying, because of who has availability to it. How has the tech for good landscape in South Africa changed over the past 2 decades, and where does it still fall short?
Well, I think it has evolved somewhat. There's certainly a greater focus on startups and socially focused startups, and an increasing awareness of things like venture capital and social venture capital, impact investing, and things like that. Unfortunately, what hasn't changed very much is civil society. So it's very much the organizations on the ground that are delivering services and support to communities that are still left behind. So that digital divide it still exists to a great degree at an organizational level. So organizations have limited access to technology to improve the work that they're doing, but also they have limited awareness. They don't know what they don't know. You can't expect a social worker to understand the nuances of a system build, a programming language, an algorithm, or kind of an AI agent. And also, they've got limited internal capacity. You have people working for organizations that are focused on kind of core service delivery. And technology is almost always not even a second afterthought, but way down in the priorities, and certainly right at the bottom of the budget allocation. So where you have very limited resources, innovation and technology is one of the last things that you can consider. So, I mean, that continues to drive inefficiencies and I think stifles innovation. So there is still kind of a big gap to fill in that tech for good landscape.
Yeah, it's what companies are focusing on and where they're putting their investments. Like you're saying, are they looking at tech for good in investments, and maybe that needs more support and more investment? And yes. What does the gender divide look like on the ground when you're designing digital platforms? Is it access, skills, safety, representation, or all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, it's always all of the above. I mean, I think that inevitably any function of system is complex. When you're looking to solve problems, there's inherent complexity, and that means that you have to consider things like access and skills and representation. And again, the contextual reality of the users. So, who are the users? What does their reality look like? What is their level of skill? What is their level of awareness? And also, what are the barriers that they're going to face in being able to engage with your platform? So, I think it is very much about being intentional and immersive in defining those user personas when you're undertaking some function of design for a system. But also very difficult to get that sort of data. And I think one of the things that has become clear over the years is that software developers are often not the best people that are to define requirements when it comes to a system. So there's often a big gap between the developers that are writing the code and the users of the system and the reality that they face. So I think that's a kind of an ongoing challenge.
So true. And also developing it and then evolving it because of multi generational changes and likes and needs and adaptability. Yeah, we may not see that all the time with everything. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we always speak about when we build systems with partners. And I mean, I think one of the important things that we say at the outset is that we're not software vendors, we're not suppliers, we're technology partners. And building a system is very much like having a child. So it's getting married and having a child immediately with somebody that you don't really know. So although you can, with a partner, try to understand what the requirements are as deeply as possible, inevitably everything changes from the day that you launch your system. So that baby, that technology baby that you have, is constantly growing and changing. It needs both parents to hold it up and to kind of manage its progress. But it is very much a living thing, and it should be evolving and changing to adapt to the environment that you're working in.
Yes, yes. So tell us about girl power. What problem was it to build, was built to solve? And what did you learn about designing tech specifically for girls and young women?
Well, I mean, Girl Power was quite a journey. So I mean, it started really in Sierra Leone. So its origins were in some work that I was doing with UNICEF, where we were implementing, well, I designed and implemented a program called the Girls Education Innovation Challenge. And the focus for me was and at the outset I said I refuse to build another system. I think what we need to do is not focus on the software, but focus on the warmware. And that was really what the program did. Was we designed it to help girls to identify and articulate the challenges that they were having, and them and their peers were having, I mean, accessing education. And then to unpack and understand the root of those challenges, and then to look for existing solutions that could solve those problems. And there we curated a whole range of existing technology resources. And then we focused very much with them on developing a plan and a model for how they would go into their own community to drive awareness, access, and adoption of the technology that could solve the problem that they had identified. So that was really kind of the origin of the Girl Power platform, because what we found was that, that immersive experience with groups of girls in a really harsh environment allowed me to understand some of the kind of the depth and the complexity of challenges that girls in particular face. And certainly difficult environments exacerbate those challenges. And also the tools that we had curated, the different systems that we found often were not really fit for purpose, and certainly didn't consider the contextual reality of girls in their own environment. So that was really the starting point for us in building out the Girl Power platform. We built it off of the architecture of the Yomobi platform, but really the intention was to provide a more flexible and dynamic tool that could be used by organizations that were operating on the ground to improve the services and the programs that they were delivering for girls, allowing them more control to adapt to their specific operating context, things like language and culture and priorities on the ground for them. So that was really the origins of the platform itself. And I mean, it's something that's constantly evolving. We're hoping that we can kind of work with other partners to extend that function and build out more enterprise and earning opportunities through the platform. But it is, as every technology is, an evolving thing.
Okay. And was it only on Sierra Leone? Did you not scale it to other countries?
Well, we implemented in Sierra Leone, and I mean, we operated it in South Africa as well. But the scale was somewhat constrained, certainly with the funding constraints, the resources that were available. UNICEF went through a massive restructuring. They're still busy with that at the moment. So there has been an enormous shift. So that has stalled a lot of the momentum that we had built. But again, that's where that resilience comes in. I think I'm not so sure if it's necessarily resilience. You have to have some level of insanity as well to kind of work in this sector, because unless you're just a little bit crazy, I think you can get overwhelmed in this sort of environment.
True. And yes, you have to, you know, stick with it. Like, what keeps you keep what would keep you keep going on this, right? Because as you're saying, there's lots of constraints and things like that. What would make you stick to this and say, I stand by this and I want to see its success?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I'm a cynical optimist. You know, and I think that's also what has fueled my resilience is that, I mean, I'm probably more cynical now than I was when I was younger. Um, but I think it's certainly the fact that there has been some progress, but not enough. And I mean, everything is changing so quickly. I mean, I'm blessed with two daughters, so I certainly want to be able to open up opportunities for them to have opportunities in the world, and certainly in their career, and the whatever they might want to do. So that's a persistent motivation. Again, I think I'm not necessarily a freedom fighter as such, but that injustice certainly does get my hackles up, and that's a good motivator. I'm also, I think, quite inclined to want to disrupt things. So if things are not working, then it's a good opportunity to mess them up. So I think at heart I'm a troublemaker, and that often rubs people the wrong way. Because I've been able to retain a lot of my independence, that has allowed me to be a troublemaker, and I think that's sometimes necessary if you want to disrupt things. Although it can be a lonely journey, so I think you have to have kind of a community around you that can support kind of where you want to get to, and that isn't always the case. I think certainly when it comes to gender and women in particular, I think it's a much more difficult journey. I think that the deck is certainly stacked against women that might want to make a similar journey. So I think it's very much about being reflective and also being aware of kind of how things are changing all of the time, and I think increasing urgency to drive some consistent change.
Agree with you. But you're definitely an ally to women in tech based on what you've done and your motivation to it. So thank you for that. How do you balance data privacy and protection with the need to collect meaningful, disaggregated data on women and girls?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's really, from a data point of view, I don't think it's really a problem, as you know, as long as you're managing safeguards and you have the right controls in terms of any kind of data, really. I think for, age is more of a consideration. So, the younger the person is that whose data you're holding, the greater the responsibility. But I think that the management of kind of data privacy and of being able to extract meaningful insights, and those shouldn't be mutually exclusive. I think it should be a function of kind of embedded privacy within the data itself. I think it's going to be more and more difficult to retain data integrity with privacy and confidentiality. I think that we're entering into a pretty frightening era when it comes to the integration of identity with functional and systemic access. So I think that that is going to become more and more difficult. And again, I think if you look at the kind of the end dystopia that could be steering towards, I think the protection of personal information is going to become a very important priority and an increasingly difficult one to achieve.
I can agree with you there. That's why, I mean, with South Africa, the national AI policy, yes, I know it was currently withdrawn and it's under revision. And there's practitioners, as a practitioner, like you are filling a policy gap on gender and AI rights now. Or is it too big a job for the sector to carry alone?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I think everyone has a role to play. I think the challenge is in ensuring that you have representative voices that are directing that sort of policy. The challenge with South African government is often not the development of policy, although in this case of AI, that's certainly an outlier. South Africa has been really quite good at developing policies. Where we're completely rubbish is in implementing them. So, I mean, if I think about the national youth policy, um, that was and certainly the early iterations were an abysmal failure because they just weren't implemented. And one of the principal reasons for those failures is a lack of integration. So, where you're looking at something that is really cross-cutting, it becomes exceptionally complex. Firstly, to write a policy, but even more difficult to implement it effectively. So I think that it is really critical that we have um, enough or the right kind of voices in the room when we're defining those policies. I don't think that government has the right people in the room. We need to break the echo chambers that exist, and also to break the pseudo collaboration that we see certainly across civil society, but also between government and civil society, where there's a lot of talk about collaboration and integration, but not a lot of practical steps to achieve that. So I think really in terms of kind of filling the gap on gender is to build some um, kind of collective voice, and then establishing those channels to meaningfully feed into policy definitions.
Yes, and to make it inclusive, very inclusive. Yes. You talk about grassroots intentions, right? How do you actually involve communities, especially women and girls, in the design process rather than designing for them?
So I think it is part of that immersive process. So you have to engage directly with users, and when I say we, I don't mean me, because often I'm the worst possible person to have a conversation with a woman or a girl about their contextual reality, because there are inherent barriers in having some of those conversations, and also bias that it comes in when trying to have those conversations. So often it is about being able to have a conversation with a peer, with somebody that is kind of understands better your lived experience, and then really to kind of build out that narrative and that story into kind of meaningful data that can inform the kind of the intention itself. So I think it's the intention is certainly about a function of validation. So you need to validate and test that intention and the assumptions that are kind of guiding that intention, and also to do as much homework as you can, as deeply as you possibly can, and then I think most importantly, when it comes to systems, is you have to be able to iterate and evolve as quickly as you can, because the first time you deploy any kind of system, it's never 100% right. Doesn't matter how deeply you've gone and how much insights you've drawn. You don't know until the user starts using it. So you have to ensure that there are consistent feedback loops. You have to ensure that there's an active process of participation in iterating those system capabilities.
Yes, I agree. That's so important because sometimes you develop something and it doesn't get used for the purpose that it needs to. It'll just be a nice to have. True. Women make up only around 30% of the global AI workforce, according to the UN Women, right? If people build these systems and don't reflect the people they are meant to serve, like how we were saying, what does that mean practically for the platform like Girl Power and Yo Mobi?
Well, I mean, I think that's very much that has been a consistent approach with many systems, and I don't think it's necessarily limited to girls or women. I think that there is certainly across the social sector, there is an inclination to follow kind of a field of dreams approach, is what we call it. So if you've ever seen that movie with Kevin Costner, where the tagline is, "If we build it, they will come."
Yeah,
And that's never the case. So building something and expecting and hoping users to come and use it as you had intended, the inevitable result is failure. So unless you are meeting clear and specific needs of your users, your system's not going to be used. There might be some initial hype, some interest based on how good your marketing is. But inevitably, if the system isn't meeting a specific and a very clear and immediate need, it just won't be used. And if it is something that is required to be used, there is an enormous incentive for users to find a workaround and to avoid having to use the system entirely. So I think it's really essential for success that you clearly understand the requirements on the ground.
true. Like how we're saying that incorporating communities into the change. And can you tell us of one situation or one platform you built where you've included the input of communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably one of the most important one that we saw was when building the Yomobi platform. I mean, we engaged very deeply with young people, with youth practitioners, and I think what was most poignant in that research process, in having these conversations and group sessions, when we posed the question to multiple groups of young people, or a challenge to them to say, well, give us a modern reference that reflects a positive modern reference that reflects an Africa of the future. So when you think about Africa, what is the image that comes to mind? And inevitably, the response across the board is poverty, disease, wild animals, nature. And then when challenged to say, well, what does an Africa of the future look like? And do you have any kind of modern references to draw on that can kind of give you something to aspire to? And, the conversation got really quiet at that point. And purely because, the young people that we were talking to were trying to think about what that was. And really what emerged was that there was a single consistent reference that came through, and that was from the movie Black Panther. So there wasn't any positive kind of reference for young people to draw on that reflected kind of a positive view of technologically enabled kind of Africa in the future, aside from this kind of single movie. So I think that was really useful and important for us, and it certainly informed the design and the styling of the platform as we built it to try and reflect very much, what that could look like, where you've got the incorporation of cultural identity, where you've got those visual references within the system design itself. And I think also, I mean, it was important for us to incorporate that gender dynamic as well. So a lot of the imagery was focused on women within the visuals and the applications, but certainly in looking at those cultural reflections, the imagery, the visuals. So it really had a significant effect on kind of how we went about designing the system and kind of what references we included.
Yes, yes. And even take into consideration where people have low digital literacy and limited connectivity, because I mean, we know that connectivity in South Africa in some areas may not be the best, right? And you would look at designing for low digital literacy and limited connectivity. So I'm sure you would have considered that without diluting their impact in your
Yeah, I
decision.
think certainly. I mean, for me, I mean, this is the where the optimist in me comes out, because I think that those are not really challenges. Certainly not anymore. I think that technology allows us to manage those challenges. I think in terms of kind of system optimization and offline capabilities, we can navigate some of those contexts where there's limited connectivity or kind of barriers from a cost point of view. And then I think in terms of literacy, digital literacy, part of the user experience is premised on making it as simple as possible. I mean, there's an entire body of academic work around technology adoption modeling, and kind of two of the core components that are required for successful systems are, firstly, ease of use, and secondly, perceived usefulness. So it really depends on how easy it is to use, and the value that I perceive getting out of the system. So I think that those barriers are, I would say, not disappearing, but certainly becoming less significant. Things like zero rating, reverse billing, offline caching allows us to navigate some of those contexts with greater ease. And I think certainly within my lifetime, that connectivity issue and connectivity will be ubiquitous. Certainly, as we see kind of acceleration from 5G through into 6G, I think we're going to be more concerned about restricting coverage than we are going to be about ensuring it, because that level of connectivity and access brings its own challenges.
True. According to UN Women data, women and girls globally already have less access to digital spaces, right? And I know we're saying that things are changing. And when they do, they are far more likely to experience online violence as AI generated content becomes the norm. Tools for harassment, manipulation, and image based abuse are scaling alongside it. When we talk about digital inclusion for women and girls in South Africa, how much of the conversation is it about access versus safety? Because we're seeing
Yes.
that in schools and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it is a balance of both, but I think that it does speak to the broader question around kind of digital inclusion, because simply providing access is not the answer, and we see this across the board. I mean, and this is some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about when we host the summit. The access is a starting point, but unless you pair access with skills and capability, unless you pair it with the ability to convert access and productive capability into value, and unless you're ensuring that you have effective representation and accessibility from things like disability as well as inclusion, and also the necessary controls and protections around it, all that you're doing with access is creating product. So without all of those other functions of kind of protection and also capability and skills, all that we're doing, and definitely for our young people, is we're making them into products to feed the social media machines, products to feed things like online gambling, and also to feed cybercrime. So it's really critical that you're considering, from an inclusion point of view, all of those factors when trying to navigate kind of access for everyone.
Yes. That's why the UN Women recently called cybersecurity as not just a pipeline problem, but a systems problem, pointing to the bias in hiring, right? Because we need to get more women involved so they can explain how they feel, the unequal access to training, and there's unpaid care on burdens with real barriers that they're feeling that, so you know less and less we want to open it up to more women being in different spaces, like example cybersecurity, right? But are we seeing that there's less women in cybersecurity and data sectors, and we need to now improve that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I don't think necessarily that cybersecurity is all that different from any other technical field. I think it's increasingly an area of opportunity for women. I think that the ability to understand some of the risks or the differences in the risks that women face versus men online. I think that's really a key opportunity, and certainly an area of insight that women can bring. Um, but I think that ultimately those barriers are similar across the board in terms of some of those opportunities and careers that are open to women. And I think that speaks more to a continued um, kind of systemic challenge or systemic issue. And I think that there's, whatever we apply into the area of things like cybersecurity, certainly there is an opportunity there for women to play a more active role. But ultimately, it is something that needs to be applied across the board.
True. So that women are equally represented in building and securing digital systems for the government, for NGOs that we're relying on. What do you think would actually change about how those systems will work?
Well, as I said, I think women are fundamentally better equipped. I think both in terms of kind of understanding the challenges and understanding kind of vulnerability, and I think also in applying a higher level of user empathy, in being able to navigate some of those risks and potential vulnerabilities. Um, so I think that again, there certainly is a great opportunity to kind of expand that as an opportunity for women.
Yeah. What has the leading the MERL technology portfolio at Samia taught you about the gap between good intentions and good systems?
Yeah, well, so I think I mean, that's a fairly recent acquisition in terms of my portfolio. Um, I mean, the good intentions are never a substitute for that kind of immersive and human-centered design. Data has to lead the design, and you have to take a structured approach to both the collection of data, but also the implementation of any systems that are required for that. I mean, we are busy with a number of initiatives to kind of improve the use of technology across the monitoring and evaluation sector as a whole, and also looking at the impact of things like AI. Certainly, there's a lot of value that can be derived from artificial intelligence in terms of things like thematic analysis and kind of classification, visualizations, data analysis, and it certainly speeds things up. But of course, the bias still exists. So you need to apply the kind of your humanness to all of the data that you're engaging with if you're going to draw some unbiased insights.
Yes. There's emerging evidence that inclusive stereotype free design is also a commercial and reputational advantage, not just an ethical one. Is that argument useful when you're trying to convince a funder or a government partner to invest in gender responsive design?
Certainly is. I think to some extent that can be a differentiator. I think the challenge is more a function of resource constraints, and managing for issues of inclusivity is difficult. And where you have limited resources, it's often the first thing that gets cut in favor of a functional capability. So it is a difficult um, consideration for many funders. And I think that if unless um, your objective is primarily to focus on inclusion, it is the first thing that will get cut. So it is kind of function over inclusion.
Yeah. And you holding a summit, right? On the 9th of September. You want to just give us a brief, some brief information about it?
Yeah, happy to. So we're hosting the Digital Inclusion Summit with IDC and Santon. And again, this is the result of frustration on my part in seeing this consistent digital divide that exists, and certainly some significant backlog across civil society. And really, what we're looking to do is to bring together key stakeholders to firstly build awareness about the multidimensional nature of the digital divide, and then to also unpack some of the risks that we were talking about earlier when it comes to providing access to technology without kind of the skills, without the safety rails in place. So we're bringing together stakeholders from government, from business, from civil society, from academia, and then also young people themselves and key stakeholders within the area of gender and disability. And we're going to be unpacking some of the solutions that focus on bridging the access gaps, fulfilling some of the productivity requirements, so in building skills and capability. Then also in looking at how do we convert access and skills into value. So looking at the platform economy and new kinds of work around technology. We're then going to look at solutions related to inclusivity and representation, and also culture within technology. And then finally, we're going to have a conversation about digital public infrastructure, because the government is rapidly deploying more and more systems to support public service delivery, but hasn't given very much consideration to what additional exclusion that will drive where you don't have a level of digital literacy that would allow you to access digital or online services. So yeah, so really we're hoping to have that conversation, and then we'll follow that up with an action series after the summit, so that we can convert some of those conversations beyond a talk shop into some tangible actions. But again, gender and disability form one of the key focus areas for us.
Great. That sounds exciting. If you could fix one structural barrier facing women in tech in South Africa tomorrow, what would it be?
Well, I think that those biases are really entrenched institutionally. So I think it is a matter of building some intentional process around both recruitment and development for women in the workplace, and then ensuring the necessary support structures to allow them to fulfill those opportunities. So I think it is firstly about kind of understanding the fact that these barriers still exist, and then looking at how best to provide some tangible pathways for women within all areas of employment to compete equitably with men. And I think that's important, as it's not to become like men, because we certainly don't need that. We want women to be women, but to have equal opportunities, specifically in the workplace, alongside of men.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm just looking at some of the comments, and we have Vumele. She says, when you start is not always where you end up. That's so true. Chilisi, She says, if you were starting a new technology project today, right? It's a question for you. If you were starting a new technology project today, what are the first five things you would want to understand before writing a single design requirement?
Yeah, well, I think certainly we want to start with the user, so understanding kind of who is the user, um, what does their life look like, what is the need that you're fulfilling, um, what are the barriers that they're likely to face in accessing and of your system, and most importantly, I think, is how do you sustain the value for your users? Because I think in order, establishing, you have a relationship through the system with your users, and in order to sustain any relation, you have to consistently deliver value. So I think those would be the key areas of focus for me.
Thank you for that. Nolo, we're saying lovely, necessary conversation. Thank you, Jason. She's also got another one. In South Africa, conversation about gender equity can sometimes be met with defensive or perception that supports women means disadvantaging women. Sorry, men, disadvantaging men.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that any defensiveness is driven by fear. So unfortunately, many men feel very insecure across the board, not just about women. I think that that's what fuels defensiveness. So if there's a fear of kind of being replaced or being superseded, that's inevitable. I think that it's something that you have to navigate, um, but I don't think apologize for. Certainly within the context of what women have had to navigate over the past 300 years, 400 years, however long it has been, a little discomfort is quite okay in my books. So I think it's just about continuing to have the conversation, and I think that's also where it's kind of, you need to keep having the conversations. I mean, again, I think that was one of the things for men as well, to be part of this kind of conversation, because often they don't have the opportunity to have these kind of conversations, and the only time that they encounter the conversation is when it threatens them. So inevitably that leads to defensiveness.
Yes. So we have one more question. How have you navigated these conversations while keeping people engaged rather than divided?
Yeah, so I think the starting point is always kind of what can we agree on, and then to work your way backwards. So if you can start out to say, at a high level, okay, well, what is fair? And I think also, I mean, it is certainly easier if you can kind of relate that back to your family or to your children. What really is fair, and what is right, and what can you agree on. So I think if you can start on kind of agreeing on kind of some of the basics, then you can work your way back to um, having a conversation, a dialogue, and unpacking some of these issues while still focusing on kind of what is the end goal. What does fairness look like? What does it mean to be successful in a way that doesn't necessarily disadvantage anyone, but where there is recognition of the discrepancies and the inequalities that are and have been in place for so long.
Yes. So we'll just quickly go to the rapid fire and then we will close up. But thank you so much, Jason, for all these insights and your perspective on it. Thank you. So the rapid fire quickest: data or intuition? Which do you trust more when making a tough call?
Always intuition.
Great. One word for the state of digital inclusion in South Africa right now.
Or fragmented, I would say.
Biggest myth about tech for good work.
Um, Open source is a silver bullet.
Favorite platform you've built and are proud of.
Definitely the Yomobi platform.
Great. Excel spreadsheets or dashboard? Pick one.
Spreadsheets, because dashboards can lie.
Okay. One AI bias you've personally seen show up in platforms you've worked on.
Gender and race, certainly more so in the earlier days, but still exist. AI is still grappling with those.
Great. Pipeline problem or system problems? Which better describes why women are missing from tech leadership?
System problems for sure.
One
So
app or platform?
rather, sorry,
Sorry.
systemic problems, shall we say?
Okay. Great. One app or platform, not yours, you think is getting inclusion right now?
So I had the opportunity to work with the team that built the Oki platform. So that was a UNICEF build specifically for girls and women. It's a period and menstruation tracker for girls and women. And really, it was built by girls for girls. So yeah, they
Great.
really got that right.
Wonderful. Coffee or rooibos while
Always,
building platforms? Okay.
always coffee.
Wonderful. Finish the sentence. In 5 years, AI for women in South Africa will be?
A non-issue, because the inclusion will be assimilated into the algorithm, so it won't exist.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jason, so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate. Thank you for your
Thanks,
time.
Prabhashini. Really appreciate it.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.